Hey everybody, I'm Candace. This is Odd Shapes channel, but tonight we're going to be talking about Black Panther. Thank you so much to everybody who's watching right now. I really appreciate you coming in. I know this was sort of a little bit of a surprise, but I really appreciate all of my viewers out there and anybody who watches this when it's streaming later on. Just, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We are gathered here today to talk about the inimitable, incredible, amazing Black Panther. It's been about a year since it's come out. It really entirely changed, I think, the face of the cinematic landscape, particularly in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It obviously was something that has, gone on to inspire other people, to inspire other artists and other mediums. And I think that, it's a really great time to talk about it. Obviously, there's a big deal being made right now because they were nominated for a Best Picture this year, among other awards for the Academy Awards that it's going to be airing tomorrow night. So that's extremely exciting. And this is a movie that's very close to my heart. It's something that is, that was something that I was looking forward to for a very long time. The second that I saw the trailer, I remember it just blew my mind. It really just lit me up. And I waited with bated breath for it to come out. I saw it the day that it came out about a year ago, and it changed everything for me. I've always been a big Marvel fan, always been a big X-Men person. Like, I love Storm. She's my favorite comic book character. Honestly, it's who I was watching in the 90s with the X-Men comic and the X-Men TV show, as well as obviously the movies that came out a little bit later in the 90s and 2000s. We're not going to get into that. That's a story for another time, how I feel about those. I could go on and on about it. But, it's funny because my first introduction to T'Challa in the world of Wakanda was when he was married off to Storm in the comics. The two of them linked up. And for a long time, I was very skeptical. Obviously, the idea of two of the African-American characters in Marvel teaming up and banding together in, holy matrimony is great. But at the same time, it seemed a little obvious. And because his name is Black Panther, I was just like, okay, so this is some character from the 70s called Black Panther. Obviously, that's leaning into the Black Panther movement. Like a nod to that. That's whatever. I don't know. It's not for me. So for a very long time, I was resistant to Black Panther. I really didn't try to find out more about it. It wasn't until this movie came out, full disclosure, that I really decided to take a second look, So I think that, most of you out there have probably already seen it. I imagine that a lot of you are probably here because you've already seen it, and either you've loved it, so you're here to celebrate with me. You didn't like it, and you want to hear why I think it's so great. Or you're unsure, and you're looking for something, to kind of fill in that hole. So let's get started. The reason that I kind of decided to do the show, I had a coworker the other day come up to me. She's a Caucasian lady, and she, a few months ago, I had actually referenced this movie in a conversation with her, and she's like, "Oh, I haven't seen it." I was like, "You haven't seen Black Panther? You have to see it immediately. It's phenomenal." And I went on to tell her all about it, why, little snippets of why I liked it. I didn't want to get too deep because you don't want to, overhype something and ruin it for people. But, I tried to really convince her to watch it. So I saw her again earlier in the week, and she had seen it with her boyfriend. And she informed me that she just didn't get it. She didn't understand what the hype was. She didn't know why it was a big deal. She watched it. It was just okay. It was a comic book movie. Who cares? And I was taken aback. I was like, how could someone feel this way? Like, this is a movie that's got, that for quite some time had a near perfect Rotten Tomatoes score. I think it's still somewhere up around 94 or 96%. It's something that I think has been lauded by most critics and audience members. So I was shocked to hear that, and I've talked to some other people who have also echoed that same sentiment. So for me, starting out, just right out of the gate, this movie is an intersectional masterpiece. When you talk about intersectionality, you're talking about, the coming together and bonding of different ethnies, right? So, like intersectional politics, the idea that, being a woman, being, Jewish, being Black, being Chinese, being, someone who is handicapped or paraplegic, so being someone who is, has special needs, or has any kind of, like learning challenges or whatever, like all of these things that make you, right? All of those things come together and they are essentially yourself. So you can't kind of pull those pieces apart. So for me, I'm a Black woman. I am also, I also consider myself queer. And for me, those two things are inextricably linked. Me being a feminist is not something that is exclusive of, how I feel about, African-American issues and issues that impact that part of the community that I'm also a part of. So to me, this movie is so encompassing of so many different kinds of ideas. And I feel like they really give a stage to each and every single one. So originally I was going to take you guys through the movie, but I won't do all of that because I think that you guys are already familiar. But I would like to kind of talk about like different moments in the film. So obviously we have the opening. This movie actually reminded me a lot of The Lion King, honestly. There were a lot of people out there who said they couldn't like understand the story, or that the story didn't seem, something that they could relate to. And I think, I say to those people, well, I get it, but at the same time, it's so many different stories. There's sections of it that are Shakespearean influenced. There are some that are influenced, like by by the story of The Lion King, where you have this relationship with the two brothers that are warring and, within one family. And all of these really awesome family themes. And that's honestly kind of the beginning of why I loved it. It really does seem to try to speak to people and give them a different way to understand African Americans, as well as people of the African diaspora. That's anybody that, comes from Africa, arguably comes from Africa that, identifies as Black, because obviously, cradle of life. But that's what I mean when I say the African diaspora, if I mention that again. Obviously, Black Panther, comes from 5 tribes that form Wakanda. There's like a very rich mythology that's there that's absolutely stunning and beautiful and interesting. I love it. I think that that kind of leaning into Bast, who is also, an Egyptian goddess, really kind of tries to tie the whole thing together. If you look at, the set design, if you look at the costume design, all of those things are kind of like a joining together of different peoples and tribes within the continent of Africa. People refer to Africa like, oh, that's African. And, yes, it's African, but Africa is, a gigantic continent. So there are lots of different kinds of people. And I feel like the way that they were able to kind of introduce that into this film is by showing these 5 different tribes and how they are either divided or unified throughout the time that Wakanda is in existence. The visuals in the beginning of the movie are absolutely beautiful. They kind of tease out some technology that you're going to see later on in the film with the sand table. You see like the rise and the fall of civilization throughout the film, like throughout the timeline. And you see kind of early on, you see like as the voiceover is discussing the formation of Wakanda and the formation of the Black Panther and like why this savior has come to rescue these people. That there's lots of warring between, the nations, and there's a lot of discord being sown, and, people are looking for something to kind of give them hope and bring them organization and, bring them this new era of, enlightenment and peace and just unification between all of the tribes. And that's how the Black Panther is born. And you see, made up of sand, all of these different, images. And one of the images that they show, which is to me so strong and poignant, is the scene where they show like the ships, like the slave ships, and you see and you hear the dialogue talking about how, the Wakandans kind of, went inland and kind of protected themselves as they saw their brothers and sisters being carted off across the sea. And for me in the theater, I'm watching this in a theater full of, all different kinds of people. I don't know if you guys know, but I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So the theater was very, very diverse. All kinds of individuals from all walks of life were there watching this and kind of sharing in this moment, which was, it was palpable, the excitement in the room. And whenever, topics of race come up, obviously it can be very uncomfortable for some people to discuss. And I'm seeing this and I'm like, oh man, this is, you're really kind of opening a can of worms. And like, little did I know that this was going to go on to just like kick the door down. I'm seeing in the chat, the technique of the sand vectoring was invented by the Black Panther team. It's awesome. The work that they do in this movie, that's another thing. Like as you get into the film, right, you see the shots of, as you see the shots of Wakanda, right? And you see like the countryside and you see like all of the things that to be, a part of the African landscape. But then like, as we enter Wakanda, you see just this like bountiful city of bustling technology and innovation and brilliance, right? And as an African-American person, there's a lot of kind of, for lack of a better word, like that'll do that happens in pop culture and in media. There aren't a lot of Black stories being told. Right now, there are. It's very much a time for, for Black cinema. It's a renaissance of sorts, I think, for Black media in general, which is awesome. But I think that, it's not something that I grew up with. And I certainly don't think it's something that like my parents grew up with. So it's so impressive to see this new take and this new understanding of like what being Black could be, right? So you're not seeing someone descending into a ghetto where all the Black people live. You're not seeing people struggling. You're not seeing people who are poor. And obviously, as far as the narrative is concerning, as far as the narrative is concerned, that is a big deal. You know what I mean? That's a big reason that, part of the reason that Killmonger has issues, with the way that things are kind of playing out in Wakanda and the way that they have kind of turned their backs on the rest of the world and the people that look like them. That's essential to his argument. But it was breathtaking, and it really touched me. I'm not a huge crier unless I am deeply unless I'm deeply touched by something, and I cried through most of this movie. Full disclosure, it was just absolutely beautiful. And I think that, being able to see people who look like myself, right? Being able to see the women of Wakanda, right? The Dora Milaje, like they are badass warriors. They are incredible. Like you look at the other women in the MCU, right? And like, they're all kick ass. Scarlet Witch, like she's amazing. Black Widow, she's phenomenal. Nebula, Gamora, like they're all really incredible. But the one thing that I think that makes the women of Wakanda unique is that none of them are defined by their male counterparts. Like Okoye is a general for T'Challa, and like he respects what she has to say. He respects her position, and he listens to her. You know what I mean? She's considered maybe not an equal part because obviously she's not king, but at the same time, it's more of a democratic system, despite it being one that elevates a man as the leader. So it was really cool seeing, their relationship right in the opening of the movie, watching her kind of rib him a little bit. Their relationship was so wonderful. Going back to the theme of intersectionality, this is a very feminist movie. These women are powerful. They're strong. They are the protectors of their king. You know what I mean? They are the ones who kind of hold the keys to the kingdom. Okoye, guides him and gives him advice. And I don't think that there's really any point in the movie. There might be one or two moments where he expresses, a little bit of hesitancy behind what she's advising him to do, but he never, ever questions her judgment. You know what I mean? There's never a moment where we have to stop and think maybe she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's sure every time that she says something, and it comes through, in the actions that she then, that then play out with her character throughout the movie. I love the relationship that T'Challa has to all of the women in his life. It's not just, okay, well, Okoye is this one woman, or it's just the Dora Milaje. It's also his mother. It's also Shuri. Like, there's an immense amount of pride and respect that he has in the women that surround him. One of the things that his father says in one of the flashbacks scenes, when he goes into the ancestral plane after he's finally coronated, we open on that scene right before he starts to kind of ascend up from the water. we see him, you know, kind of like contemplative, looking at some news footage of his father. Like, there's a vulnerability that they show in this movie that T'Challa has that is really uncharacteristic, in my opinion, of the way that African American men, especially, are portrayed. A lot of times in cinema, they're really tough, or, you know, they don't take criticism well, or, you know, for example, like Chiwetel Ejiofor's character in Doctor Strange, right? One of the reasons that I have a little bit of an issue with that movie is, you know, you have this man who has been training, you know, for decades, and has been trying to, you know, reach this enlightenment and this new set of powers. And here comes Mr. Strange out of nowhere, out of left field. He doesn't obey any of the rules. He you know, kind of flies in the face of tradition. He's, you know, not particularly even good in this movie because he still has a lot of learning to do, and yet he has the helm handed to him. And then at the end of the film, it's kind of made out like Chiwetel Ejiofor is now the villain. You know, like, he's reacting to injustice. So why is he now the villain? You know what I mean? So that kind of brings me into, you know, like the contrast between the vulnerability of T'Challa and how he kind of, you know, he misses his dad. He's open about the fact that he's in mourning. And then, you know, you look at somebody like Eric Killmonger, right? Eric is angry. He's like almost the antithesis of who T'Challa is, for better or for worse. T'Challa loves and reveres women. He you know, listens to what they have to say. He listens to what his advisors and his councils and his elders have to say. He respects tradition and honor. And then you have, on the other hand, you know, Eric. And Eric he doesn't know the love that T'Challa does. He doesn't know the history, and he doesn't have the familial bonds. It's almost as if he doesn't understand where he even comes from, because he's always kind of been in Compton. And obviously Compton, you know, a little less so now, I think, than in the past, is not an easy place to live. In the beginning of the movie, when we see the flashback of T'Chaka, his father, coming to visit with the Dora Milaje in tow, he sees his brother Njobu, right? And he tries to communicate with him about some suspicions that he has about the betrayal of Wakanda. And Njobu kind of, you know, he comes forward and he says, you know, and this is another thing that like really got me. Part of why I think that this movie has been difficult for some people to understand is because it really does require an understanding of Black history. And unfortunately in this country, you know, Black history isn't everyone's history. It should be. And we have Black History Month. We're in it right now, and that's awesome. But it's the shortest month of the year, and there are many people who don't think that it matters. There are many people who are like, oh, well, we're all people. I don't see color, yada, yada. And that's wonderful. That's great if that's how you feel. You know, mazel tov. But to me, color is something that everybody sees. It's something that, you know, definitely changes, you know, most of my days, for better or for worse. You know, whether people don't, like, I don't think, oh, I'm Black and I, you know, exist in the world. It's more like people remind me in subtle ways that I'm different to them. So, you know, in this film, like, you have someone who's coming from Wakanda. They're coming from this kind of cocoon of peace and of goodwill and, you know, of honor and respect. And he's thrust into America, and America starts to eat away at him, right? He sees the way that his brothers and his sisters are being treated. You know, when that scene opens, I'm fairly certain that we are supposed to understand that as a time during the LA riots in the early 90s. When Rodney King was taken out of his vehicle, he was beaten up. The Los Angeles PD did a horrible job of handling the situation and trying to diffuse that and to keep all of its citizens safe. They absolutely failed, and it's a failure so great that it led to, you know, O.J. Simpson being acquitted. Like, it's something that had, you know, huge consequences. And you know, you're looking at Njobu, and he's trying to explain to his brother, like, we're turning our backs on these people. These are our brothers and sisters. They need us. You know, we turned our back on them when they were being carted off to, you know, from their homeland and taken to America. We turned, you know, our backs on them during civil rights, and now they're over policed. They're being watched. Their families are in ruin. You know, drugs are being pumped through, you know, their neighborhoods, and still we do nothing. So while, you know, Eric, his son, goes on to kind of further his agenda, you kind of understand exactly where Njobu's coming from. You know what I mean? He's not wrong. Like, we are still feeling the effects of that today. Black Lives Matter is a movement because in this country for far too long, it's been extremely easy for people to excuse violence against African American people. You know, a lot of people argue, oh, compliance, you know, it's compliance. You gotta, you know, do what they say when they tell you to do it. And to a certain extent, yeah, compliance can help you. But, you know, when you're being held at gunpoint, like all of your most basic instincts, you know, are kind of ringing in your head. It's not really a moment of understanding. It's certainly not a moment of respect, especially if you haven't done anything to deserve it. It's very dehumanizing. So he's watching these people, you know, basically be, you know, kind of ground up, you know what I mean? And he's like, you know, this is wrong. We should be supporting them. And, you know, to be fair, you know, T'Chaka does try to convince Njobu to come home, face the council, you know, he tries to talk to him and say, hey, you know what, like, let's really figure this out together. You know, you need to stand trial for what you've done. He finds out that he has sold out the Wakandans to Ulysses Claw, which is obviously terrible because he's a horrible villain, however delightful he may be. But you know, he's kind of just like, he's looking at his brother like, who are you? But his brother has been kind of turned by the pain and the suffering and the struggle that he sees in the world. So the movie even starts strong, you know, with two different men coming from two opposite places, yet both united as family. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of that in the African American community as well, where, you know, some people have much more radical belief systems than others. Some people are angrier than others. Some people, you know, have different approaches to the way that they like to live their lives. You can even kind of look in the 1960s, Dr. King versus Malcolm X. Malcolm X is absolutely Njobu, and T'Chaka is more of a Dr. King figure, and that kind of also extends to the younger version of these two men as well. So, you know, I think that like the whole Afrofuturistic tone of this movie is excellent. Sci-fi is not really an area where African American people shine, unfortunately. You really do have to know where to look. If anybody is looking, feel free to look up Octavia Butler. She's one of my favorites. I think after Game of Thrones is off of television this year, they're going to be working on one of Nnedi Okorafor's books, which is very exciting to me. That's very interesting, you know, Black futurism. So if anybody is looking for more of this, that's where you can find it. Definitely, Walter Mosley has some really good work too. So, you know, if you're interested and you're curious, get out there and read it. But you know, I think that it was a welcome change, in my opinion, from what I've seen in the past. You know, like it's difficult to kind of get that perspective. I also really enjoyed, you know, the way that they handle honor. Right, honor to me is one of the central plot points and the central themes, you know, of this movie. I think a big part of the reason that Njobu is so horrified is because he comes from a place of honor and he can't understand why he's in this place now with these people who don't seem to have any respect for these people. Like, he comes from a great civilization, and quite frankly, like, that's the way that I was raised. My parents, I come from a biracial household. My dad is Italian and my mom is African American, and you know, she raised me to, you know, be cognizant of everyone in the world, not just, you know, my own history, which unfortunately isn't something that everybody gets. So, you know, throughout my life, I've felt extremely passionate about, you know, these issues, about, you know, Black Lives Matter. Like, I myself was held at gunpoint for a misunderstanding in Miami. You know, I was going the wrong way down a, you know, one-way street, and, you know, a police officer stopped me, and it you know, even though I was compliant, it still turned into something terrifying. And it very much came from a place of fear. It was obvious that this police officer drew their weapon because they were afraid of me. And in my head, I'm like, in what universe am I scary? You know, in what world do you draw your weapon at me? Like, I've never even so much as been suspended from school. But, you know, that fear kind of leads people. And I think that, you know, that fear is something that, you know, kind of twists who Njobu is. And then it further twists his son. You know, Eric is this man who is, you know, he's not some common thug. Like, you see him and, you know, he seems really radical. You know, you see him in the British Museum when he's talking to that woman, and he's, you know, he appears threatening. Like, he comes up to her and he kind of, you know, comes on very strong, and the guards rush to her afraid. You know what I mean? He cites the fact that he's been watched ever since he walked in. That's something that I'm familiar with. I have that, you know, anytime I really go shopping. People follow you around. It's something that you have to be highly cognizant of. And I think that all of these little bits and pieces, all of these little bites and snippets that are kind of tucked into this movie have made it really important to African American viewers, because finally little parts of your life that, you know, they're not good moments. So they're certainly not a piece of they're certainly not a piece of the puzzle that is who you are. Like, you don't want to believe that that is a part of who you are, but it's also kind of inextricably a part of your being, because it's something that you have to deal with, you know what I mean, on a daily basis. Let me see. I kind of want to keep this short, you guys. I could talk about this all night, especially to phenomenal people such as yourselves. I'm seeing in the chat, people are asking me a couple of questions, so let me take a moment to answer some of those. Let's see. I have people in here saying the use of color is amazing. Absolutely agree with you. The cinematography is stunning in that film. My only complaint in that movie, because it's near flawless, the storytelling is phenomenal. The villainy is excellent, top notch. Everyone has reasons for what they're doing. No one is just a villain to be a villain, which I love. But like the brightness of every single scene, like whether it's, you know, the depths of the blues and the pinks and the purples of the ancestral plane that T'Challa goes to when he visits his father in the afterlife, whether it's, you know, the sunset at the end, or the sunrise, pardon, at the end, when, you know, T'Challa is like holding Eric Killmonger in his arms, you know what I mean? Like, as he kind of breathes his last breath and sees this gorgeous sunrise in Wakanda, this place that he's, you know, heard about all these years. Like, it's just absolutely stunning. Definitely a huge part of why this movie is lovely. I have someone here saying, Kimber is saying, in a movie with such strong Black female leads, was there a character that you related to the most? It's interesting because Okoye is my favorite character. I think that's a little obvious. A friend of mine, actually, I'm going to share this with you. A big part of the reason Okoye is one of my favorite characters is because the scene where she takes off her wig to fight, it's so, I don't know, it's brilliant. It's like a brilliant Easter egg for African-American viewers, because to me, obviously I have natural hair. This has been a long journey. For a long time, I didn't believe that my hair would grow. I didn't give it a chance. I've gone natural twice in my life. This is actually the most successful I've been. And it's obviously an extremely personal thing. So, you know, you see Okoye, she's proud. She has this beautiful shaved head, this gorgeous tattoo, you know, that, you know, symbolizes something, you know, that is, you know, beyond our idea of what honor is. Like, it's you know, it's something that kind of makes her stand out among the women that she leads. Like, it's the crown, you know what I mean? And as they step out into Seoul to execute their kidnap Ulysses Claw plan, she has to wear a wig to conform to, you know, to the other Westerners that are going to be at this location's ideas of beauty, right? So she walks in and she's wearing her wig, and it's itchy and it's terrible, and you can see that she's going through a fresh hell in this wig, and it's hilarious. But at the same time, you know, for me, as someone who has had this struggle before, for me, hair is more of an accessory. It's a plaything. You know what I mean? It's definitely, you know, personal, but it's also something that I, you know, like to change all the time. But there are a lot of women out there who, you know, have a great deal of shame or a great deal of mixed feelings about how to wear their hair, whether they should relax it or, you know, let it grow naturally. Just recently in New York, there was actually a law passed saying that businesses can no longer discriminate against people because of their hair. And it seems a little ridiculous that someone would have to have a law saying that the way that your hair grows out of your head can't be something that someone discriminates against you for. You'd think that that would be right up there with race or sexual orientation or gender or, you know, abledness or what have you. But there's a law now to make sure that this doesn't continue happening to people, which is bizarre. So it's the scene where, you know, Coogler is juxtaposing the way that people have used hair to kind of oppress women, African-American women. We have our own section, a little tiny section in Walgreens with our hair, with our hair care products, rather than it just being among the other hair care products for everyone to use and for anyone to look at. It's something that is, you know, relegated to, it's almost mysterious, you know what I mean, when it shouldn't be at all. So you're taking this beauty standard and you're going, fuck you, man, I don't need it. She uses a weapon, which is the wig, you know, which is used kind of, it's weaponized against African-American women to try and help them kind of conform and fit into what the Western ideal of beauty is. And she's using that weapon and kind of reclaiming it as her own. And I can't think of anything that's more badass than that. Like throwing a wig in somebody's face so that you can have a couple of seconds to, you know, do the old 1-2 and really get them and take them down. To me was a level of genius that I lost it. Like I didn't know what to do. I was like, what is this movie that I'm watching? Like the whole movie it was a roller coaster of emotion for me, to say the least. And I think that that Okoye is definitely my favorite character. As far as who I identify with the most, that's Shuri. I think that, you know, Okoye is prized for her acumen as a warrior and as somebody who is, you know, in charge. She's a badass. Nakia is prized for having, you know, a nimble mind. She's very agile. She's a spy. She gets in and she gets out. She saves people. She has like kind of her own personal agenda that she's running. And then you have Shuri, who's just like, you know what? I'm just a cool person, man. I just want to exist and make cool stuff. I'm a scientist. It doesn't really occur to her that there's anything wrong with what she's doing and the way that she's doing it until the scene where, you know, she kind of is faced with that like criticism, that critique from M'Baku, right? So M'Baku comes in and, you know, the reason he has a problem with T'Challa and the reason he wants to try to lay claim to the throne is because he believes that, you know, they are foolish for allowing a child to control, you know, all of their powerful vibranium and all of their technological resources. You know, he seriously questions his judgment. And honestly, that brings me to my next point. It's very interesting that M'Baku doesn't object to the fact that Shuri is a woman. He objects to the fact that she's too young. He looks at her and he says she doesn't have enough experience to be, you know, in the role that you've placed her in. Like, what makes her so qualified to be able to have, you know, all this power in her hands? And that was another thing. Like a lot of the conflict that happens in this movie, it's very well thought out. I feel like everybody has a reason for believing the way that they do. Everyone has a reason for doing what they do. For example, right, the difference between Nakia and Eric, you know, Killmonger, is really just their executional style. It has nothing to do with, you know, their belief systems. Their beliefs are very similar. You know, Nakia also goes to T'Challa before he even meets Killmonger. You know, he's speaking to her in the marketplace and she's like, why don't we help? Like, I've been outside of our world and I know there are people crying. There are people crying out. They need us. You know, how are you, you know, just keeping to yourself? Like, if you were to leave Wakanda, if you were to really look around, you would know that there's a hole in this world that we can fill. And, you know, as all of us know, you know, T'Challa has left Wakanda. You know what I mean? He has experienced what's outside of, you know, the invisible walls of his nation. And his father promptly gets shot. I would argue that's probably not the best introduction to the world outside of your universe, of your bubble. It's really disappointing and disheartening. You know, you step outside of there and despite all of the power that you have, you're powerless to stop your father from being murdered. And this is something that, you know, M'Baku also brings up. You know, you were powerless to save your father. How can you save us? You know, and that question, it rings throughout, you know, this beautiful, you know, this rock face. You know, everyone's listening to it. Everyone's watching on and kind of looking on, waiting for, you know, T'Challa's response. And you can only imagine what he's thinking. You know, he is this man who's supposed to be, you know, he's supposed to be the king. He's supposed to be infallible. And the one thing that he felt he could do and the one thing that he was charged to do, which is, you know, keep his father safe outside of Wakanda, he's essentially failed at, you know, and it's a low point for him. It's a low point for their people, and he's responsible. So, you know, it's interesting that, like, you know, M'Baku doesn't come to say, oh, well, I'm better than you, and that's why I should be king. He has genuine concerns. Nakia has genuine concerns. Killmonger has genuine concerns. The amount of heart that they give Killmonger really is interesting. Like, you know, you see him at first, you think, oh, he's just some guy that is, you know, kind of a loose cannon. You know what I mean? He seems like he's kind of just some common criminal. But as the movie goes on, you realize that he's educated. Like, he's gone to, I think he goes to MIT, I believe. Like, he graduates, you know, from school. He goes and becomes a Black Ops operative. And, you know, that's how he learns to kill. That's how he learns to infiltrate, new civilizations and take down their leadership and take down their government. And it's exactly what he then employs when he comes to Wakanda. It's like he's been training for that moment all his life. And in that moment, when when it's revealed by Agent Ross that that's who he is, and they finally are able to look him up and we learn about him, it actually takes like a good 35 minutes, I believe, for anybody to even name that character. He's just a random young man. Like you don't even really recognize like who he is and why there's such an impact on the future. So he's this intelligent man. He has very specific reasons why he believes or does not believe in things. He feels as though, Wakanda's turned their backs, very much like Nakia. Wakanda's turned their backs on people who need them. But it's extraordinarily personal to him. Nakia is still, within the confines of Wakanda. She belongs there. It's her world. It's her country. She's always existed there, except when she has chosen to leave. He has never chosen to leave Wakanda. He had to leave Wakanda because his father, went elsewhere and raised a family and, fell in love with an American woman. He's born outside of Wakanda, despite, being downloaded on a lot of their traditions and understanding how their civilization works. He's still somehow an outsider, despite being, within that community. He has, the tattoo that proves that he's Wakandan. It's obviously something that's been important to him. And the fact that he's been shut out of that society is something that is irreconcilable to him. And the only way that he can think to fix that problem is to share the wealth. Let me see. Are there any other questions? Let me take a look. How do you feel about the use of Wakanda and its citizens in Infinity War? From Odd Shape Channel from Tom. That is a great question. I have a lot of mixed feelings, honestly. It was wonderful to see Wakanda, but I felt like it was a money grab, quite frankly. I know they're going to give us a new Black Panther movie. I know that I'm going to have another chance to go to Wakanda and to learn more. This time, Gambino's in it. Donald Glover is the villain, which I'm very excited about. I saw some pictures from the other day with a big bushy beard that's kind of light brown. I'm kind of wondering if that's for Black Panther, if they're like maybe filming that, and maybe that's like why he looks that way. Like it's pretty interesting. I have a lot of theories about that. But I think that like people were really excited to go back to Wakanda, and they knew that people were going to be excited. They knew that people were kind of waiting with bated breath for more, glimpse of that world again, because it's so interesting and it's so cool and beautiful. And, Ryan Coogler did an excellent job. The writers did an excellent job. Like, I'm pretty sure he wrote it. I think Donald Glover actually was consulted on some of it. I don't know that he's credited, but I do know that he and Coogler worked together a little bit on that, which kind of helped him usher in the role that he's taking now in the new movie, in the sequel. So I think that that Marvel was like, you know what, people really like Wakanda. It was surprising how awesome it did. Everybody really likes it. So let's put it in there. And so like I'm watching the trailer and the trailer shows a ton of Wakanda. And then I get to the movie and the last 5 seconds are in Wakanda. And the worst part of the movie happens in Wakanda. But seeing Black Widow, Okoye, Shuri, and like Scarlet Witch like all together was extraordinarily gratifying. I really hope that they make like an all-female MCU movie where it's all about those awesome ladies and they're kicking ass. Maybe they form, a special ops team. Maybe we, discuss, the Me Too movement and how that, what that means to Wakanda. Like that would be amazing. I'm pretty open to where they might go from now. But I do hope that they don't. I hope it doesn't get boxed in again. I also think that this movie was interesting because it is one of the few films that doesn't really have a huge cameo. Like you have Agent Ross and he's cool, but most of the time, you have like a couple of people in there. Like you had Cap in Thor. You have, a lot of different like awesome cameos where people are kind of, crossing over. You have, Hulk in Thor Ragnarok. Like you've got all this really cool, play going on. And at first I was like, oh, this kind of sucks that they didn't put any, the Winter Soldier, obviously, in the post-credit scene, but they didn't really have a lot of cameos. But after we're watching the movie a couple of times, it almost seems like there's no room. You know what I mean? There's so much story that's being told and not a lot of time to tell it in. You know what I mean? It's a fairly long movie for a comic book, like a popcorn film. It's 2 hours, I believe, and like 30 minutes, maybe 14 minutes, somewhere in there. And I feel like they use every single moment like well. You know what I mean? It's action packed, it's jam packed to the gills with interesting anecdotes and awesome character development and plot points. Just really awesome. And let me see. I have another one here. I think people who complain about This is silly. I made a black actor. This is the turn. Oh, so Ashley is saying, Geek to My Nerd is saying, what do you say to people who complain that this film lacks diversity because there are only 2 white characters? I know some people joke about the token white guys. Yes, of course. But some people are serious. So this is a very wonderful question, Ashley. Thank you so much for asking. I say to those people, yeah, it's our turn now. I think that that as far as diversity is concerned, to me, quality is quality trumps quantity all the time. Every single time, it's always quality, not quantity. Yes, there are 2 white guys in this movie, technically 3 if you count Winter Soldier at the end, and obviously countless of the bodyguards in the soul scene in the club, but the white people that you have in this movie play very specific roles. So you have someone we've seen before, right? Obviously, you see Claw again. We're familiar with him from a couple other movies in the MCU. We already know him. He's old hat. He's up to his old hijinks and shenanigans, just being a wild and crazy guy. And then you have on the other hand, Agent Ross. To me, this movie's treatment of Agent Ross is probably one of the best ways, best examples of diversity in kind of any movie out there right now. Like you have Green Book right now that's being kind of nominated and touted as a really great movie about race and all that stuff. And I'm reading a lot of reports. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm reading a lot of reports that it's very kind of disingenuous. It seems kind of put on like Driving Miss Daisy and all those kind of old-fashioned movies of that ilk. The way they treat Agent Ross in this movie, it's like if mainstream Caucasian-driven cinema, right, would treat African-American or Hispanic or Asian characters the way that Agent Ross was treated in this movie, I feel like we would all be better off for it. You have this person who, yeah, he's called out as a colonizer. But in the beginning of the movie, when you first see him, he walks in, he is, he's trying to take charge. He tells T'Challa, well, this is what I'm going to do, and you're on my turf, and this is my deal, and I'm going to get Claw, and I have all of these, all of these priorities. But at the same time, he's kind of white-splaining everything to him because guess what? You're in Seoul, Korea. You don't have any jurisdiction here, and neither does T'Challa. That's neither of their homelands. But for some reason, he believes that he has, carte blanche to kind of, take control of this scenario, right? It's very much an assumption of being in charge that I think comes from the fact that where he's from, he usually is in charge, if only by default. As the movie goes on, right, there's a scene where, Clow is about to be questioned and, Okoye is speaking, in Wakandan to T'Challa about, Agent Ross, and he's being very, I don't know, he's doing his I'm a big man thing again, where he's like, I'm in charge, don't you forget it. And Okoye is like, who does he think he is? Like, doesn't he understand he's talking to a king? And like all of us in the audience are thinking, oh shit, he is a king, man. Like that's like walking up to, I don't know, the Queen of England and being like, listen, Queen of England, you shut up. I'm leading the show. This is my rodeo. Like, no, you would never do that. That's insane, right? So he saves Nakia's life, right? He is heroic in that instance. And she gives him a chance. Everybody's kind of willing to write him off. He's a part of the reason why, Claw ends up being, re-kidnapped back by, Killmonger and his crew. But, they allow for him to have a redemption for the disrespect that he showed to T'Challa and for being, quite frankly, kind of a dick. They bring him to Wakanda. They trust him, right? So, Killmonger is saying, and Nakia is saying, we need to, well, Killmonger less and more so Nakia saying, why don't we open Wakanda to people? People should be able to come here. People should be able to seek refuge. And I think that, like T'Challa is like, okay, well, maybe I let somebody in, but, I don't trust them. They're going to ruin Wakanda. They're going to drag it down with them, right? So he makes an exception for Agent Ross because Agent Ross has saved Nakia's life. Obviously, that's his love. So he lets him come. I love the banter between Shuri and Agent Ross. He kind of doesn't know what to do with her. He's not used to someone who has no filter that's just saying exactly how she feels. He's on her turf. So she doesn't have to watch what she says. She doesn't have to not call out, his condescending tone or his bad behavior, making assumptions about her people and about her as both, a woman and as a black woman. And she doesn't have to take his shit. And it's awesome. Like, it's great to see that in a moment where she's like, hey, no, chill out, dude. We saved your life. Yeah, you saved Nakia, but we saved your life. So then you have this huge fight scene, this battle. It's wonderful. It's awesome. There's battle rhinos, which is basically the coolest shit ever. I mean, the battle rhinos alone, that's like a 90% Rotten Tomatoes score for me. I mean, that's just genius on a whole other level. Super cool. And you know, these aircrafts are lifting off into the sky with all of these, you know, Wakandan weapons, and you know, obviously there's urgency to stop Killmonger, and to also keep these aircraft from carrying these weapons away out into the world where they're obviously going to be used for evil. And Agent Ross is the hero. He's not a white savior, which is bomb. I'm seeing in the chat, you guys also feel the same way. White savior is not great. Movies like Avatar, Dances with Wolves, Last Mohicans, Last Samurai, movies like that, like, you know, it's getting old, and it's starting to be so old that even, you know, white people are starting to notice, like, this is kind of boring. Why is there one white dude that's saving like all of these people of color? Like, they've existed for centuries without him, and now they can't live without him. Like, that's kind of weird. So now that people are starting to kind of see that, it's awesome to know that. I mean, obviously you guys are all more or less woke, but not everyone is, you know? So it's cool to see that recognition kind of making its rounds out there, kind of among the masses. But he's not a white savior. He comes in and he assists. Like, he comes in for the assist. You know, they allow him to shine. They give him a chance to show, you know, what he's passionate about. Like, you know, you find out, you know, earlier in the film that, you know, the Agent Ross used to be, you know, a pilot. They put him to good use. They allow him to literally swoop in and save the day, you know, to a degree. And they welcome him into their community. You know what I mean? And it's a huge contrast. You know, when you think about, you know, T'Challa being kind of hesitant to allow people into Wakanda, again, he's afraid that they're going to ruin it. And he allows Agent Ross in. He allows the Winter Soldier in, right? Both of those people are white. Neither of them pillage, neither of them rape, neither of them ruin, neither of them threaten. Both of them are happy to be there, and, you know, end up feeling honored that this world has been open to them. Whereas, you know, in contrast, Killmonger is technically a son of Wakanda. He's someone who does belong there, and all he wants to do is come in and mess stuff up for everybody. So, you know, I think that kind of awakening of, you know, it's not just your own people that you need to save. You know, saving your own people, all that does is create the reverse of the problem. What you have to do is educate. You have to explain. You have to find understanding. You have to seek understanding. You know, you have to be open-minded. And I think that it's kind of reflective of what this movie, you know, is really all about. You know what I mean? I think that in you know, maybe a roundabout kind of way, it's very much been a great uniter. Like, yes, there are detractors online. There are people that, you know, want to talk smack about it. There are people that, you know, are racist and they're salty that this movie is doing well. They don't see the big deal. But, you know, for me and for people who perhaps have never even had, you know, someone try to explain the Black experience, you know, in America to them, this is something that's revelatory. And I think that that's awesome. Especially because there's also kind of another layer to this movie that, you know, I don't have as much research. I kind of wanted to keep this one a little short for you guys because, you know, I can talk all night. But it's the relationship between Africans and Black Americans, right? Or people of the African diaspora that are, you know, not still living in Africa. So, you know, obviously being a natural, there's going to be, you know, some times that I'm going to need some assistance in figuring out how to do my hair or what have you. If I have questions about, you know, how to, you know, do a protective style or whatever, I hit the message boards. And in my searches online, I've seen on message boards, like, women from Africa that are very critical of, like, what I'm wearing right now, right? So, like, I'm wearing, you know, a reflected, kind of like a look that's inspired by Shuri, a little bit, and a little bit by Angela Bassett. Like, her look is phenomenal. I don't even want to talk about Angela Bassett because she's phenomenal and amazing and beautiful. I probably don't have to tell any of you that at home because she's a goddess. Particularly if you watch American Horror Story, she can basically just do anything. Side note, loved the shout out, the little Easter egg of her with white dreadlocks, because she's always been the woman that I've chosen to be my personal Storm. And unfortunately, I never got to see that come to fruition. So seeing her with white locks in this movie just kind of, like, made everything wonderful for me. But a lot of African people have a hard time with the way that African Americans do cultural appropriation. cultural appropriation is one of those things that, a lot of white people, I think, get, very reactive toward when you talk to them about it, just like white privilege, right? Both of those are kind of, hot button issues. They're very buzzy words right now, buzzy terms right now. But I think that both of them have a place in this movie because they're very widely discussed. So, cultural appropriation, when a Kardashian wears Bantu knots in her hair and everyone's like, look at these awesome Bantu knots, it's the hottest fashion. Yeah, that sucks. But how does it feel to be an African woman, a woman from Nigeria, or a woman, from one of these other, civilizations or nations in Africa that, feels like, if you're Kenyan or, you are, Somalian or wherever you're from, and you have these traditions that are being borrowed by people that are essentially American to you. And that's what's really interesting, I think, about being Black in America, is that you're not really considered American. Your history is something that's relegated to 1 month a year, which is the shortest month of the year for people to try to understand you. And even then, they're real lazy about it, and they'll complain if there aren't any white people in your movie when you're just trying to fucking extend, a hand across the aisle, so to speak, to kind of find community with these people. But you're also not African. You know what I mean? You don't know where you're from. You were stolen from your homeland. I can trace my family tree back. I happen to be, lucky enough to be able to trace at least part of my family tree back to, the early 1700s with the transatlantic slave trade. And I don't know where my people are from in Africa. I know that they're probably from the coast just because of the logistics of all of it. And from what we know with like the maps of the route that they would take, with like the Middle Passage and all of that. But I couldn't tell you anything about where I'm from. People, when people are trying to be racist, they always say, go back to where you're from. And, I feel like that's something that Killmonger also kind of has on his mind, go back to where you're from. Like, he has this mythology of Wakanda and this big story of like this place where he would ultimately belong, but he feels rejected, and, it's kind of the same thing. Like, you're not quite American, you're not quite African. So what is there for you? You know what I mean? What can you latch onto? So it's a really interesting conversation. And then privilege as well, right? So obviously white privilege is a term, a lot of people kind of raise their hackles at it, but everyone has privilege. Like, I have privilege despite being a Black person because, I'm A, not poor, and B, I am, educated, and C, I mean, there's a litany of reasons why I personally have privilege, and T'Challa has to face his privilege when he steps in front of Eric, because Eric he never got to be vulnerable. He never got to have, a life where he had understanding, or he had his father to raise him and guide him and tell him right for wrong. He kind of started violently and he ends violently. He goes out very much the same way he kind of comes in. So I love the narrative that this movie kind of has around those two issues. Just, something to leave you guys with. I think that I've kind of said everything that I'm feeling about this movie. If there are any other questions that anybody has that maybe I haven't answered, or if you just want to tell me what you think of the format, or if you want to tell me which movie you'd like me to watch next and kind of give you guys a recap on, I've been thinking about actually doing trying to do a podcast or a vlog, if you will, of Black cinema. Maybe not just specifically only Black cinema, but I'm interested in doing maybe Get Out or Black Klansman or Sorry to Bother You. I could probably even be talked into doing The Help if somebody really was interested in hearing what I think about that. I think that this movie really is something that remains awesome. I watched it again in preparation for this. And it still makes me cry. Like, it still makes me cry seeing beautiful, beautiful, shining Black faces, gorgeous smiles, like just looking at, just seeing people who look like you on the big screen in the Marvel universe, knowing that, that door is open. It's kind of the same thing with, when Obama was inaugurated. Like, you see all of these old people that, remember drinking from a colored water fountain, 50, 60 years ago. Like, you remember people who, have, our grandparents or our great-grandparents. In my case, my great-grandparents were right on the tail end of slavery. There's a lot of progress that I think that, this country believes that it's gone through. And I love how this movie both highlights that and also shows us, like, not just by, you know, the topics that are discussed, but also just in existing and just being Black Panther showed this country that like we do have a long way to go. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm sad that that Kendrick and SZA are not going to be performing All the Stars. That song is beautiful. I think it's extremely fitting for the film. I love that it's kind of like a mashup of like the two narratives. Like there's a lot of, you know, Killmonger's kind of thought process in there, but you know, also like this other kind of more vulnerable part that you really only get to see when Killmonger goes back and sees his dad in his ancestral plane. And I think that I don't know that it's going to win Best Picture. I don't. But if it does, I'm excited to watch history get made tomorrow. So, yeah. Thank you so much to everybody for watching. Again, if you have any other questions or if you want, you know, to talk about this a little bit more, you can find me either in the comments here, leave something for me, and I'll get back to you. Or you can find me on Twitter at @ThatCandaceGirl, all lowercase, CANDACE. And I want to just, before I sign off, like I just want to, once again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to see, you know, more of me, please let me know. I would be happy to oblige. And I want to just briefly give a little shout out to a couple people. Thank you so much to Kim and Tom for running this for me, helping me do this. They are the purveyors of Odd Shape Channel, so please check out their content. They have OSP, among other awesome streaming shows that are really, really great. And they actually have a whole network of people, including Geek to My Nerd, Ashley and her husband, Joe. They do a wonderful show. We've got, you know, some people who are a little bit more behind the scenes, like, you know, Cal and Janine. Well, Cal has shows too. Night's Watch coming soon. And just really good people in this community. And I'm really happy and honored to be a part of it. So please definitely take a look at those guys. Get at me, get at them on Twitter. And again, thanks so much for being here. I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Wakanda forever.